All right, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's lecture. Our topic for tonight is Pre-Columbian poultry in Meso and South America. It's going to be taught by a return instructor, Elsie Hunrvogt. Tonight's lecture is going to be part of our Wapawa Period America lecture series. It's a monthly series that promotes the study of North, South, and Central American cultures within the SCA period. We have been lucky enough to host these lectures over the last 10 months. And we've created a really fantastic library of information on our YouTube channel. Our topics range from agriculture to weaving to scribal arts. So please check out our YouTube channel if you haven't already started viewing some of those videos. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. As you can tell, this lecture is being recorded, so we are going to ask that you either raise your hand or wait for the instructor to call on you, or just leave comments and questions in the chat throughout. This is going to keep our recording nice and clean for those who aren't able to join us tonight. If you're not asking a question, please keep yourself muted just so that her instruction is clear. Secondly, in joining tonight's lecture, you are agreeing to our zero tolerance policy for racism, xenophobia, colorism, and other forms of discrimination. If you have any concerns at all about an attendee, a lecturer, or any kind of topic that we're covering, I hope you'll feel safe in reaching out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat so that you can get in contact with us and let us know what's going on. Thirdly, we are still looking for additional instructors for January, February, and March of 2026. So if you have a topic that you would like to teach, you can reach out to me. Again, I'll put my contact information in the chat, or you can message me through the Facebook event, and we'll get you together, see what kind of topics that we can cover in the next couple of months. So I am going to quickly move over to share her lecture with us tonight. Thank you so much. We're super excited to learn more about poultry.
Thank you very much for doing all the tech side of things for me.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
great to be able to come back and speak with you guys again. I had a really good time the last time. It's such a great group and such great energy. So this is actually a class that I sort of crowdsourced some with some of the people who are here about what sorts of things would you guys like to know about pre-Columbian poultry, and hopefully I'm going to touch on those topics. I've taught a lot of poultry classes in the SCA over the years, and I've learned that for the most part, the people that take it tend to either fall into the hobbyist side of things, or where they have their own poultry or are interested in getting their own poultry, or I get a lot of attention from the cooks. So we will dance around both of those areas with this particular topic, but hopefully everybody will be able to pull out the information that they're interested in. And if you have questions, drop them in the chat and we will address them as we go. And this can be a little bit of a choose your own adventure as I follow along with the slides. Let's go ahead and start with our first slide. All right, so what we are looking at here is just kind of an overview of what types of vertebrates. So vertebrates are animals with a spine. You know, they're what a lot of us kind of mentally picture when we think of as animal. And so these are four families that had vertebrates that were domesticated in Meso and South America prior to the arrival of the Europeans. And so we have the camelids, which would be the llamas and the alpacas. We have the cavidae, which is our guinea pigs. We're going to skip that third one and come back to it later. And then we have the canids, which the domesticated ones probably came when the people came. That seems to be the best information we have for that at this time. Next slide, please. And next one. This presentation is set up, and I'll leave it in the chat and we'll get it in the YouTube description. It's set up so you guys can kind of go through and reference. That prior slide is just to let you jump ahead to the various things that we're looking at. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about this a little bit. So what this is a cladogram. This is a reference on all of the different orders of birds that are out there that exist in the world. And next to that, we've gone ahead and I've got arrows next to the ones that are domesticated. And so our little light arrows, which are at the very top of the image and at the very bottom of the image, are for ones that were domesticated in the last 1,000 years, or no longer than the last 1,000 years. The darker arrows, those are a couple of our categories. Those are the ones that were domesticated more than 1,000 years ago. So those start to become potentially types of birds that could fall under poultry as a category. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay. And I'm going to apologize. I've got a little bit of a view of the waiting room in front of my screen, but we'll talk about what we've got. So again, there at the top with the two blue squares, those are our songbirds and our parrots. They were recently domesticated. We do have all of these groups with boxes over them are groups that are found in the Americas. They're found in North and South America, at least members of the order. All of those orange type boxes are groups that are found in North and South America, but they're not ones that are domesticated. If you see, we've got the columbiformes. That is going to be your pigeons and doves. Those are found in North and South America. Those are domesticated. They were domesticated quite some time ago, but the domesticated examples that we have are not birds that are not birds that are living in North and South America. They were domesticated elsewhere. Okay, then we've got a few more that are not domesticated. And then we start getting down into our galliformes and our anseriformes. Okay, these are that Galla and Anseridae that was covered in that first slide where we talked about which vertebrates were domesticated in North and South America. So that's really what we're going to focus in part because that's where we find poultry. You know, sort of a rough definition of what poultry is it is a bird that is domesticated and used for, that is farmed typically and used for food or fiber type purposes, maybe both. That's sort of the rough way that we look at. And then there at the bottom, we have our Struthioniformes, which were fairly, and that's going to be our ratites. So that's ostriches and emus and rheas and those kinds of large, big birds. Those are birds that were domesticated more recently. And again, they were not domesticated in North or South America. There are examples of that order from other parts of the world. Next slide. So we dial down into our poultry and we look at the groups that we could have in place. And let's go ahead and go to the next one. We'll highlight some of this. And we've got our different groups that are placed. So our Pheasantonidae, that's going to be pheasants and chickens and turkeys and a lot of those things that we typically think of as being poultry in place. The Odontophoridae are the New World quail. So if you guys have quail that run around, maybe you have bobwhite or California quail that you've seen out in the wild, that's going to be in those categories. The Crackidae are a specific type of group of birds that are found in South America. They've never been domesticated, but they are a group that's down and around there. And so then we get down, that top half is our kind of our land dwelling birds that run around the ground, a lot of times that we think of, what we often think of as poultry. The bottom portion of that, we start to get into our anseriforms. So these are our ducks. And these are the ducks that we go through and we see around every day. And ducks are definitely a good candidate for this category. Next slide, please. So we get into our Muscovies. And this is what a wild Muscovy duck looks like. The red caruncles are very, very characteristic that you see, the big red fleshy bits that are around the eye and rising up from the bill. Next slide. We'll see that even on the domestic birds, maybe not this little guy in the front, but if you look at the other birds further back, you have that bright red characteristic, and you can start to maybe make that out in some of the period images. It gives you kind of a characteristic that shows you Muscovy versus other types of ducks. Next slide. And we started with our feral Muscovy, and then we went to our domestic example. We started with our wild Muscovy, we went to our domestic example, and then this is the third kind of Muscovy that you find out and about in the world, which are the feral populations. In many cases, in different parts of the world, the Muscovy have been moved with the domestic types, and then they have re-escaped from human captivity and set up feral populations where they are free living, but they are from the domesticated genetics. And so this would be an example of what a feral Muscovy could look like. Next slide. So just to give you guys a little bit of a contrast, this is a Peking duck. So this is the line of ducks that are very similar to what we see. It's a very common meat type duck, which are these are example of commercial meat ducks. It is going to be closely related to many of the ducks that we're used to seeing in the wild and in our parks and that sort of thing. These are different lines of ducks. They have several different characteristics. They are capable of hybridizing, and you will see some hybridization that is done to produce mullards, or sometimes called mule ducks, where they cross the Muscovy and the Peking type ducks to create hybrids, and those are used in the meat industry, largely because Muscovy grow really well and very large. Next slide, please. So if we look at the standard range for our Muscovy, you can see that this purple area is the year round. These ducks just kind of hang out. They are all over the place. They are throughout much of the regions that we are studying. They have really, really wide distribution. They live in the area. They're not migrating through. They're just happy ducks to hang out, and they are readily available and have been for centuries. What I do want to point out is if we look a little bit along the Pacific coast, there is that little spot that's sort of separated where we have some populations of year-round Muscovy in place. That's going to come into play a little bit later on. So I just wanted to call your attention to that. If I could have the next slide, please. Okay, so we also have a host of names that were used by various indigenous populations looking at ducks and how they refer to them. And so I've got a complete listing for you here. If anybody has listened to me try to pronounce non-English languages before, you will quickly learn that I am not a linguist. So I will leave the pronunciation of those to those of you who are. But there is a nice listing of them here for anybody who is looking for a little more information or might run across some of these names in their research as they're going through and they want learn a little bit more about ducks and being able to pursue those rabbit holes. Next slide, please. So in terms of the early domestication reports, we have reports from as early as 50 AD. We have this report up in coastal Ecuador, so that's going to correspond with some of those little splotches along the Pacific coast that we were looking at on that initial slide. And so we can see that we had wide range reports with early domestication throughout South America, extending up into Central America. We also have lots of images of ducks used in different bits of art that survives as part of the pre-Columbian extant material culture. Next slide, please. And this is just going through and looking at those areas, giving you a map for those who don't maybe automatically have that in your brain. You can go through and see where we've got these pinpoints, where they have reports of domestication, or we have evidence that the birds were domesticated very early. So we have a really strong history for these particular birds being in close contact with humans and being used for food and fiber and other uses. Next slide, please. And here's the fiber example. I love when I remember the order my slides are in. So this is a feather garment that is at the Met Museum. When they went through and they looked at the pieces of all of the feathered items that they have in their collection, they found that actually it was a very small amount of bird species that were used. This wasn't something where it represented a large amount at all, which was a pretty small amount. And that makes sense. It's the birds that probably they would have had some of the best access to. And what I find really interesting is once you get past, all the parrots and all of their bright colors, the next most common thing that we see used are actually the Muscovy ducks. They have some brilliant coloration. They have a lot of iridescent feathers. And if they're being raised for food and fiber, they are going to be easy to get large amounts of feathers from because you've got that close association with humans in place. So here's a feathered example. I know somebody had asked for that information. Next slide. Okay, so we get to go on to turkeys. And turkeys are great. They're actually have kind of an interesting history. The turkeys as we know of them today, if we look on the photo on the left hand side of the screen, that was actually a flock of wild birds in southern Caid that I took a photo of several years ago. But you can see the similarity between those birds and the top photo on the right, which are commercial bronze. Those are Nicholas Valley of the Moon genetics. So those have been selected to be commercial birds. And then we have kind of the common white feathered turkey that a lot of us think of that is the most common example of that's probably a Nicholas broad-breasted white if I had to guess, which is what a lot of us would wind up getting from the grocery store. The turkey came from Mexico, traveled to Europe, and then came back to us as domestic strains. Let's next slide. And we can see where the natural distribution of these are. And this is specifically, there are a couple of different species of turkeys in the Americas. Galapavo is the one that became sort of the domestic turkey that we all think of. But you can see spots where these birds, we've got the standard range for them, and then we can see spots where there's some migration or some later introduction of the various species to the point where they have a distribution across most of the United States. Next slide. The other species of turkey is this bird that we find in the Yucatan Peninsula who has these beautiful iridescent feathers. As far as we can tell, these are not the genetics that became domesticated birds, at least not domesticated birds that are a large part of the commercial industry today. We don't have a lot of evidence of whether there was specific domestication of these, but we're going to circle back to that topic here in a minute. Next slide. So if you look at the different subspecies, so the MG, that's our Meleagrides galapavo. So that's the species that we're used to working with. We can see that distribution through southern Mexico, and we can see that there are a variety of subspecies that we find throughout North America, both from Mexico from modern day Mexico into the modern day United States, and that natural range of those birds. Next slide. When they have gone through, this is actually just some names. I think there's another slide coming. We may circle back to that one. Let me go one more. Okay, here we go. Okay, so they did go through. I showed you that slide of all the various subspecies that they went through and took a look at. And what they found is they've gone through, now that they've got these great techniques, they can go through and look at the genetics of the bones, and they can look at the genetics of the ones that are out there. And what they are finding is they have evidence where there is likely domestication of the birds somewhere between 300 BC and 100 AD. And those are going to be that Galapavo that we're looking at in place. Next slide. And this is what a wild turkey egg looks like. For those of you that do not hang out in turkeyatteries, this is a lot like what a domestic turkey egg looks like as well. Same thing, very similar. It's a little bit bigger than if what you're used to is a chicken egg. If you've ever seen like a jumbo chicken egg, it's kind of in that size range. Next slide. Okay, so we have a little bit, this is obviously a post-Columbian example of it, but I liked it because it was a really good written description of the types of husbandry that we had in place that was long established and very culturally ingrained, where people are breeding their birds. These are not simply things that are being taken from the wild. These are not birds that are being hunted. These are birds that are farmed. And they're farmed and they are incorporated into the diet. And we have established populations where we have generations that have gone through a domestication process, which takes quite some time. Next slide, please. And the person who's doing the selling of the hens also breeds the fowl. So we have the beginning of a poultry farmer, which is obviously a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And we have some lovely artwork of this lovely hen and her adorable little poults that are in place. And we also talk about some of the bad things that can happen in business with people selling sick birds or birds that have tumors and other problems along with them. So as somebody who likes pathology, I actually find that one kind of interesting too. Next slide. Okay. This was the thing that I found absolutely fascinating, that we had an ingrained belief within the system that's being reported by the Spaniard in this case, where he talked about if they were sitting on their eggs and if someone approached them wearing sandals, no chicks would hatch. And so that was one that I have never totally figured out what the base cause of that could be. There's a lot of poultry husbandry that you will see referenced in works around the world where someone will say something I'm like, oh, okay, I know exactly why they did that. That particular one, I haven't totally figured out why the chunklas are magic, but apparently they are. So maybe someday we will cross a little more information across that, or who knows what we'll get from there. So next slide, please. Okay. This is the one that I do find really interesting. They talk about the adulterous person entering the house and the chick would fall dead belly up. One of the things that you can see in turkeys, particularly in turkey poults, so a poult is a baby turkey. Turkey poults can occasionally have a condition called flip over. What it becomes is it's basically sort of an acute on chronic heart failure. They wind up with a lot of water in their belly and they wind up dead on their back with their belly up. And it's a very distinctive thing. You can see this in a number of cases. You can see it in fast growing birds. But one of the risk factors for this has always been raising birds at altitude. And so when I look at this and I look at the topography of modern day Mexico, my assumption is that this is probably the result of flip over that probably comes from the poults hatching at altitude and more importantly, being incubated at altitude. So that would be my take on that one. Next slide. Okay, so this was the slide I kept waiting for when I was showing you guys those images of the distribution of the different subspecies throughout the Americas. Apparently, I moved it in the presentation. So what we've got in this particular slide is an example. So we know that turkeys were domesticated in Mexico. We have ample evidence of that. The question came up is, were they ever domesticated anyplace else? And so these are some samples from the southwestern United States. And what they found as they went through and they looked at the changes in these birds on a molecular level is they found that there probably are at least two locations where birds were domesticated in the Americas. It is possible that knowledge from one group helped inform knowledge from the other, and so maybe they were able to domesticate them a little more readily. But this is something where it probably wasn't a one-time, oh, we domesticated turkeys and it was magic, and then that went forth from there. It probably happened several times and trading back and forth and everything from those times over hundreds and thousands of years. So next slide, please. And this is a brilliant thing where Speller basically tells you the same thing that I just said, that there is a clear genetic distinction between the two populations, and that at least two times having domestication arise would make the most sense. Next slide. Okay. And again, expanding on the idea that there could have been some cultural exchange back and forth that made this simpler. Once one group's learned how to do it, maybe they taught somebody else how to do it. Maybe it arose completely independently because humans are smart like that. Next slide. Okay, so where we tend to see that is the in terms of the earliest evidence, they are finding that in the north central southwest. Again, this is within Mexico, and that there is a lot of evidence of husbandry, so turkey dung and eggshells and that sort of thing. We don't have evidence all the bits and pieces, but there is at least enough things where you're looking at these regions where there is obvious evidence that yes, when you start to talk about those areas, those were domesticated birds as well. Next slide. So then we move on to chickens. Chickens are not indigenous to the Americas. So the question comes, did they get there before or after the Europeans? What I want to start with a little bit is where chickens came from. So these are some examples of jungle fowl. They're really pretty, very iridescent birds. Next slide. And here's the green jungle fowl. And so jungle fowl were distributed basically throughout the Pacific on a variety of islands into Southeast Asia. Next slide. Here's I love the Sri Lankan. I've always thought they were some of the prettiest birds, but next slide. And then we get to the red jungle fowl, which this is probably the typically when you start looking at the folks that argue about chicken domestication and where the genetics came from, the red jungle fowl is probably where most of the chicken genetics came from. You can sort of see this from this little rooster on the left where he looks a lot like a gamecock. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is where you are looking at the distribution of those 4 species of jungle fowl that all probably contributed to becoming part of a chicken in what we consider domestic chicken today. Next slide. And this is all the fancy genetic things with cladograms that are shrunk down so small nobody can actually see what any of the things are. But what's important about looking at this particular graphic is a lot of genes came from a lot of places and it all kind of blended together. And somewhere out of that is where we came up with our domestic bird. Probably, again, over many, 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 many hundreds of maybe thousands of years. Next slide. So gradual process, long-term genetic exchange, and back and forth between the wild populations and the domestic populations. Next slide. Okay, so chickens, we're looking at somewhere around 10,000 years ago is probably where that domestication started to take place. They don't have the exact space dialed in, other than most researchers seem to agree it was somewhere in Southwest Asia, or excuse me, Southeast Asia. Next slide. Slow development, lots of giving things back and forth, probably a differentiation over a couple of thousand years, which is certainly something that human beings have continued since the initial domestication. Next slide. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the purposes of poultry, and certainly food and fiber are ones that are in there. One of the things that we know, at least for the breeding of birds in Europe, was there was also a lot of breeding for cockfighting, which carries on to some of the aggression in some of our modern poultry breeds today. Next slide, please. So slow domestication, then we had migration, and then human beings got super duper involved, and we had hybridization that came through, and then certainly once we got in towards our later time periods and you start to think about, for example, the Victorian era, we really start to have a differentiation into what we think of today as modern breeds. Next slide. So we talked about the chickens being somewhere around 10,000 years ago. When we think about humans coming to the Americas to form the indigenous populations, as we think of them today, those were probably 15,000 to 50,000 years ago, over several routes, depending on where they were going to. Which sort of leaves us to a question, because there was some overlap there for regions that chickens were in and regions that human beings came from. But we do have a little bit of a gap there in terms of at least coming over with the initial migration, as we suspect dogs did. Next slide. So once the Europeans got to our region, they're showing fairly early records of chickens that are there. Chickens travel really well on ships. They provide food while you take them. We've long suspected that's part of how they became distributed across the world as well as they did from the region where they were first domesticated. Next slide. So then the question kind of becomes on where did they come from? So we do have this account from the 16th century where the birds were received from traders who came across the Southern Ocean in a big house. And we know that the Polynesian people were covering quite some distances, and they were capable of being stalked by items such as chickens. So is that potentially where the birds first arrived? And if so, did they beat the Europeans? Next slide, please. So that gets us into some of the work that's been done in Chile. And this has some degree of, there's been some argument back and forth over the years, but we've got one site in particular where they have gone through and story came up and found examples of chicken bones in a context, next slide, that would make sense for it being part of domestication. You can see the various layers that we have here, and we've got some of the layers are going back and forth. There's some question about which layer things came through, what dates they fell into. The site itself was abandoned prior to European contact. And so it would seem that if we can find chickens in that area, it would be consistent with a pre-Columbian introduction. Next slide, please. And when Story went through and looked at some of the remains and the stuff that they found that morphologically fit with chicken bones, they were able to go through and do a calibrated age that would have put it there prior to the arrival of Europeans to the region. So that is a lot of the thought that, okay, they could have come in with some of these Polynesian voyagers that would have fit with the story that the Spaniards heard. Next slide. And it would make sense. We certainly know that there are other products that have seemed to have gone the other direction from the Americas that traveled with the Polynesians. Sweet potatoes would be an example of that. Next slide, please. Here's our example of the sweet potatoes with the work that was done by Green, and we can follow the naming conventions of those that sort of provides added evidence for that particular crop moving from the west to the east. Next slide, please. So apparently the archaeologists are all about the drama. That's what I learned in doing this. So Story's work, Story published several times, but there were a lot of people that just didn't feel completely comfortable with the work that was done. There was some question about if the dating was correct. There was some thoughts about, yeah, the site was abandoned prior to the Europeans, but was there contamination? Did things slide across? And many arguments ensued over at least a decade, maybe a bit more. So if we go on, this was work that was published in 2025. Next slide, please. We can look at, this is Story's findings in this time period. They have these are those chicken bones that were identified with the dates identified along with them. Next slide. But what Buring found when they looked at it is there were some morphological differences. So the shape of the bones was different from what they would expect from a chicken. There were some changes as they looked at it that it just didn't seem like it was a perfect fit. Next slide, please. And so what they did when they went through is they took those slides and they went through and they did a molecular analysis on it. And what they found based on their morphological, so looking at the shape of the bones and looking how it was done, they thought it was probably a tinamou. So the great tinamous were wild birds. They're ground dwelling birds. You can see a photo of there on the lower right that are very common in that area. And so you could very readily capture these types of birds. We didn't have evidence for their domestication at that time, but those are birds that could have been eaten in that time period. Next slide, please. Uh, when you go through and you look at the degree of distinction, so we're back in our cladograms here, right? On the top portion, we have our ostriches, our moas, our tinamous, everything on down. Okay. If you look at slightly different bits of DNA, different chunks, you're going to have these cladograms sort in slightly different orders as you look at it. But you can see that all of our ratites or close to ratite type species are clumped up together, and then the chickens are separated from there. So when they went through and they tested those bones, what they found is there was nothing in their initial test that seemed to be chicken. Next slide, please. And unfortunately, and so that's the reference at the top was the Brewing reference. And unfortunately, in the process of going through and looking at all these bones and trying to go through and doing all the depth of molecular testing, they were not able to, they ran out of sample. They weren't able to go back to the old bones and check and see if it was tinamou or this, that, or the other thing in the comparison. So there probably is a little bit of controversy. I know that some folks have really looked at the work that Story did as a explanation for chickens being in South America prior to the Europeans, and that would certainly fit. It's also equally possible that it was just tinamou, and maybe it was a mix of both. That could be why you have both things. It also could be something where there was a problem with the initial analysis. There have been questions about it over time. And so for now, for me at least, it remains kind of up in the air about whether or not chickens beat Europeans to the Americas. But I think hopefully we'll have more discoveries over the years, and it will be an ever-changing landscape that will bring us more and interesting things as we look at it, and we can come up with better and better analogs for our recreations. So, and that is my last slide. So I'm happy to take questions if anybody has any or comments.
I joined late, but is there a way that we could get the slide deck, or are you sharing that, or
Yeah, absolutely. Let
it's
me
not in my chat if
see.
you dropped it in there because I joined late.
No problem. I will drop it in the chat again.
Perfect.
And
Thank
it's super wordy and really designed to be something you guys can go back and read on your own. Because it's kind of an interesting, it's an interesting area. And I know some of that was fairly quick. If you don't spend a lot of time working with ecology and that sort of thing, some of the cladograms are a little different to look at if it's not an area you spend a lot of time in. So studying it on your own is sometimes helpful.
You skipped over a couple of the slides because you were looking for something and it was around some of the artwork. Would you mind going back to that?
Sure.
Okay,
Thanks.
let me see if I can finagle back
it's
to whatever we were
it's
looking at.
it's yeah,
Um,
it's probably in the
it's in the
turkey section.
turkeys. Okay, we'll look for the turkeys. Give me just.
There should be hyperlinks on
Oh,
each of
yes.
the. Yep,
All right, I think we found it. Give me just
yep,
one moment
for just this
to
sort of
share
occurrence.
again. Please let me share. Oh, okay, there we go. Is this what we're looking for?
It's there we go. Was that the shaft whistle? Yeah. So this is some of the Klima pottery. And just an example of a turkey. It was actually kind of, I always grew up knowing turkeys as guajolote, and I started working in the poultry industry with a number of folks from South America, and they told me that no, that was totally the wrong word. I had to call them pavos, which always confused me. But yeah, turkeys have a long association with Mexico and Mexican culture. Did you have a question about the particular slide?
No, there was no particular question. I love the artwork. And so there was that one. And then the very next slide also had some images that you didn't talk about. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that as well. Thanks.
These are turkeys. So this is out of the Mayan Codex. I am not the art person. I'm the science person. But that's where these particular examples are for. The reference is there on the bottom if you want to look at them in more detail.
Thanks.
Yep. Did we have any more questions or anything I missed in the chat? I saw some good discussions going on that I was looking for to go back to.
I had a quick question about the arcanas. Are they considered to be the earliest domesticated? I mean, even though they're late, they're way, I mean, they're late in terms of domestication, but are they considered to be, what am I trying to say here? The first domesticated South American breed? And I know
So,
all the complications here.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a little bit of framework. So one of the things, my personal take on it from having done a lot of poultry research over the years and a lot of horse research, breeds as we think of them as modern people are largely a Victorian concept.
Yeah.
The idea that you're going to take an animal, you're going to line breed it, you're going to move it someplace else, and you're going to continue to line breed it to a certain type. That's a Victorian concept. So I don't know about the Aracanas because my interpretation is that the chickens were post-Columbian in South America. That's my personal interpretation of the science as it currently stands. Okay. So once I got to the chickens are post-Columbian, I stopped looking into it for this class. In terms of type, I'd be curious to go back. It's not something I have looked at it for a lot of the European breeds of chickens. I don't know if you heard me earlier. I always tell people I do the horse research for me, I do the poultry research for you guys. Yeah. But for the most part, when I have looked at it, this is more European focused, but I don't find that strong link between what we see as a modern bird and what they had. They had types, at least in Europe, that they bred for. But it's such a disconnect that it is maybe at best a recreation of the period breed, but the nomenclature doesn't match up well for my interpretation of things. There are researchers out there who disagree with me, and they might be able to give you a better answer.
No. I'm actually in line with you because I think the Americana is also, or not Americana, God, I can't talk. The Arcana is post what we think of as medieval period, but that there are still bloodlines that seem to connect with, and not even pre-Columbian, but after European contact, but that there are some older bird landfowl lines in there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the DNA came from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So yes, if you go through and you do ancestry on the chickens, you'll be able to find some really old DNA that matches old bones that we can find other places because DNA goes from thing to thing to thing. The the piece that I come back to specifically on chicken breeding. We know that domestication happened over thousands of years. There was seemed to be a lot of back and forth between the two. Um, but a lot of times what we don't talk about is exactly how quick the generation time is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you're looking at for most poultry, most chickens, you're looking at about a 6-month generation time, plus or minus.
Yeah.
So in 100 years, humans can really mess them up a lot. And so, yes, the DNA goes from time to time to time to time, and it's floating around in there, but you've got these artificial selection pressures that are part of breeding animals on top of that. So unless the people who are making those selection choices are being very, 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 very intentional about preserving that ancient DNA or that ancient type, I find it hard to believe that it would happen to survive in any way that would be recognizable. Does that make sense?
No, no, no. I understand what you're saying. And I think I'm
Okay.
using breeding too liberally when I really mean, domestication was just not nearly as specific as breeding.
Yeah, I mean domestication has a lot of changes that goes with it, and I can tell you, even working with um like modern jungle fowl in a research context, I mean
Hmm.
they're not quite domesticated, but they didn't take much to domesticate them.
Yeah.
These are not domesticating chickens was probably a pretty easy process. I think domesticating turkeys was probably harder
Uh-huh.
because you see a lot more behavioral differences from a wild turkey to a domestic turkey, even when they're very similar in type like a small bronze. Whereas jungle fowl, I mean, they're aggressive. They live maybe a little less communally, but they still have a lot of the behaviors that we associate with our modern poultry. So I don't think it's quite as far apart. If maybe
Cool.
that helps.
No, thank
It
you.
might
And
okay.
yeah, I don't want to bogart. Surely
Yeah.
other people have
The
questions, but thank you.
Well, the other piece I can maybe give you, my best scientific wild ass guess. If the birds came with the Polynesians, they're probably fairly similar to modern jungle fowl. If birds came to the Pacific coast of South America first by the Europeans, um, the leghorn type chickens, our laying type chickens, are closer to sort of that Mediterranean type bird and that Mediterranean genetics.
Yeah.
So without looking really in depth in what Spain had, that would be my guess on what would probably be closest, would be something in that Mediterranean lines in terms of what has survived to today.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Good. Hope that helps.
Yep.
So this is Willow. I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you look at any, and I'm going to use this term loosely, was there
Okay.
any evidence of recipes? When I say recipes, I don't mean the modern use 1 cup of whatever. I mean I'm going to use the European variation. I don't know enough about the fowl of the Americas. The don't use the goose for this meal. It's too fat. The goose is better for that meal. Or this is, is there any evidence of that for the different possible poultry?
So for turkeys, and this is where my research comes to. I'm teaching a class on this at West Coast Culinary Symposium in February. You should all come out to it. I'm teaching turkeys as food. But for turkeys, looking at the Florentine Codex, there's a lot of description on using turkeys in conjunction with the types of spicing and the types of stews that they would have been used with, and a lot of more details in there. I didn't go into a lot of detail of that for this class because it's post-Columbian.
Okay, and that's what I was worried. Any pre-Columbian evidence? I don't know if we have any records that give us anything that could vaguely resemble the beginnings of a recipe, or an idea of how it's prepared or eaten.
I'm gonna turn that over to some of the folks who you're probably gonna get better answer from some of the folks who research those cultures more than I do. what I have seen is there's not a tremendous amount of what we think of as written evidence. So even if it's like husbandry type things, I think most of the written type things that we see are all going to be after the Europeans brought that written language there. There may be some archaeological evidence of what we found, what kind of items we found together, but I'm not aware of any written descriptions. I'm not sure if there may be some pictorial descriptions in some of the codices. Someone else that's on this call may have a better information on that than I do.
And even not written, even oral. Again, the don't use the goose for this concept.
Yeah.
It'd be fascinating if there was anything. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I'm going
or
back
comments?
can you hear me okay?
Cool.
I'm going back in the chat to see if we had any other questions from folks. Lucy was asking if Polynesians brought chickens all around the Pacific. Are there other island locations that got chickens around that same time?
In Polynesia? I haven't looked into it.
And then there is another comment here from descriptively named user. Residue in pottery would be interesting to look for, probably in reference to the conversation about recipes or descriptions of food practices.
And that's where I think a lot of this is going to come down to is probably residue in pottery for getting to some of those, maybe some of the pictorial works that are out there. You can see, tamales, and those types of things I have seen. I love all the images of tamales. I am all about all documentation of tamales, but I haven't personally seen anything that there's enough of those ingredients that are to there. The tamales, I think, were made with turkey. There are some references in the Florentine Codex to turkey being used in conjunction with tamales, as well as turkey being used in conjunction with stews. And duck would be another example of it. The one question I have a little bit in terms of those is obviously we don't have pork in place. I'm doing research for this turkey class that I'm teaching in a couple of months. And there was one blog out there that asserted that maybe the javelina were used in place of swine, but I'm still a little gray on that one. But yeah, other than that, ducks and turkeys would have been really good evidence. We do have examples of them selling what are translated as geese. I'm wondering if some of those may have been ducks. So, but yes, Florentine Codex is definitely post-colonial. Try not to lean into it too heavily for this particular class. But definitely one I will cover more in depth in the other one. And I after I've had a chance to teach the turkey as food class, if it's got enough information, if I'm able to tease out some more of the post-Columbian New World information, I'd be happy to come back and share it with you guys for that particular one.
Absolutely. We always love having you. One last thing from the chat that I've scrolled back to that I think would be interesting, especially for folks who didn't get to come, so they don't get to see this exciting chat happening, because it has been going the whole lecture and it's been so fun. User has helpfully named themselves Jessamine of Anstiora, thank you, in a previous class that they had attended on the Aztec Mexica culture. Said that is common people were forbidden from wearing sandals, which might explain the mystery of the turkey raising. And then Sochik helpfully added that perhaps this is a rule less about the poultry and more about society and social rules. But there have been some conflicting stories about where this sandal myth comes from.
That's very cool. That's awesome. I think you guys need to teach classes on that so I can attend them. The other thing that my brain always goes to, because my world is very tied up in avian influenza right now and biosecurity, is my brain sort of wants there to be like a disease biosecurity side of things. And at some point, maybe I'll deep dive what diseases they had, if I can find the right sources. But yeah, that's cool. teach on those things so that I can figure out why we can't have chunkless with the poults.
Right. So that is all of the questions that we have from the chat. Any last takers before we start to close out for the evening? Awesome. Thank you so much. We always enjoy your class. If you guys haven't yet watched her incredible class on horses in Pre-Columbian America, please, it's on our YouTube channel. I will put the link back in the chat. Thank you once again for attending. Thank you. It's a wonderful turnout for this class. And if you have a topic that you want to teach on, maybe magical sandals, who knows? If you have a magical sandals class that you would like to teach in January, February, March, please get in contact with me. My email address is going in the chat as well. But in case you're just listening and you don't have access to the chat, it is just SCAYZMA, YZMA at gmail.com. Send me an email. Let me know what you'd like to see, or if you would like to teach a class, we'd love to have you. Thank you everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll see you guys next month.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.